بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد إخوة الإسلام عباد الله. This evening I won't take too much time inshallah. But this evening I wanted to just go over a little subject that I believe is very important and pertinent considering the behavior of some that attribute themselves to al-Minhaj al-Salafi. And I think that the best way for me to begin this particular kalima would be with the statement of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala when he says, قُلْ إِنَّمَا حَرَّمَ رَبِّيَ الْفَوَاحِشَ مَا ظَهَرَ مِنْهَا وَمَا بَطَنَ وَالْإِثْمَ وَالْبَغْيِ بِغَيْرِ الْحَقِّ وَأَن تُشْرِكُوا بِاللَّهِ مَا لَمْ يُنَزِّلْ بِهِ سُلْطَانًا وَأَن تَقُولُوا عَلَى اللَّهِ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, He gives the verbal command to the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam to say, the verbal command qul, or say, and after that he states, I am innama harrama rabbi al-fawahisha, my Lord has only prohibited immorality, the apparent and hidden of it, and sinfulness and transgression without due right, and to associate a partner in worship that which no authority has been sent down. To associate a partner in worship with Allah, that which He has not revealed or sent down any authority. And that you say about Allah that which you know not. That you say about Allah that which you know not. Now this particular verse, the scholars, when they explain it, they clearly state that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala within this verse started off with that which was least harmful or least grave. And He ended with the sin that was the most dangerous, the most grave, and that's for so on. And so we see that the second to last sin was ashirk billah, associating a partner in worship with Allah. But then there was a sin that was mentioned after that. And that sin was to say or speak about Allah from that which one has no knowledge of. And the scholars, they state that every bala, every calamity is in speaking about Allah without knowledge. The statement that Jesus is the Son of Allah is a statement about Allah without knowledge. The statement that Jesus is the third of three, that Allah is a triune God and that has three personalities, being the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. This is a statement about Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala without knowledge. So every calamity that we find on the face of the earth usually goes back to speaking about Allah without knowledge. Even some of the innovations that we find amongst the Muslims today, like the qawl that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala is everywhere and in every place, and that we are forced to do the actions that we do. And other than that, from the statements that we find from the people of innovation since the time innovation started to spring up until this very day. So, speaking about Allah without knowledge is a grave and dangerous sin. And the point and purpose of me stating this is going into the reality that some from those that attribute themselves to the Sunnah and the Jama'ah actually fall into this. They adopt this attitude where they, like the methodology of the Salaf is their personal property, and they can say what they want to say and thus forth and so on, as it relates to who's on it, who's off it, and thus forth and so on. And when you question clearly question, clear questions that necessitate precise and clear answers, when you ask questions, you get these flim-flam responses that shows and indicates that a person is speaking about aspects of Allah's religion without knowledge. Yani ignorant of the qawaid and the dawabit, the principles and the guidelines, as it relates to what it is that they may be speaking about, especially as it relates to what the people commonly refer to as minhaj issues. That we find today a lot of people thinking they know and they don't know. Thinking they're upon qawaid and they're not upon qawaid. Thinking they're upon guidelines and they're not upon guidelines. They actually violate guidelines. And so they're speaking about these affairs without knowledge, passing rulings, declaring people to be whatever they declare them to be, and thus forth and so on. And all you have to do is question, and you find that these people don't know what they're talking about. And I'm going to be even more clearer. You find this when people that claim that they recognize the errors and the ghulu of people like Spubs and the Germantown crew. Yet you have these people recognizing their ghulu and thus forth and so on, yet they fall into that which is similar. That which is similar. And this is a calamity upon that person and upon our dawah. Especially considering the fact that a lot of the people that are indulging in these types of behaviors are people whose hukum will be from amongst the awam. They've never studied anywhere. Some of them may be even second guessing people that studied qawaid. With a scratch the surface level statement of a imam from the past, but they're not taking into consideration the context in which that imam may have made the statement. And thus forth and so on. I could be very long-winded explaining what I mean, but I think my general point is understood, and Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala knows best. So what I want to do, I want to read from this book, As-Salafiyya, and this is from the author works of Sheikh Sulaiman Abel Khayl, and he's one of the people of knowledge in Riyadh, for those that are unaware of who the Sheikh is. And it's like I said, I don't want to take too much time. I just want to, there's a chapter, I don't want to read all of the chapter, but I just want to read some vital points from the chapter, inshallah, and with the hopes of the point being made explicitly clear. Now, so anyway, the Sheikh, the chapter is entitled Nusus A'immat al-Da'wa al-Salafiyya fi Luzum ضوابط التعامل مع المخالف المسلم ومنها. He states basically the text as it relates to the imams of the Dawah al-Salafiyya in their adhering to the guidelines or standards as it relates to interaction with a Muslim that is in opposition, to something of the text. And so the first thing he states, النظر فيما يؤول إليه الأمر من المصالح والمفاسد, examining the examination as it pertains to what will lead or what would eventuate the affair, for lack of better translations, as it relates to al-masalih wal-mafasid, benefits, overwhelming benefits, and mafasid, yani harms. So, in fact, let's just go right into what the Sheikh is saying, because what the Sheikh is saying in this chapter is very important. So he states, تطبيقا لهذا الضابط نجد أئمة الدعوة ورحمهم الله تعالى إذا كان الأمر متعلقا بإمام أو بعالم أو بمن له أثر في السنة فإنهم يتورعون ويبتدعون عن الدخول في ذكر هذه الأخطاء. He states, in applying this standard, we find that the Imams of the Dawah, may Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala bestow His mercy upon them, if the affair was connected to an Imam, a specialist, or an Alim, or whoever has remnants as it pertains to the Sunnah, then refrainment, and being distant from entering upon mentioning his mistakes, there will be some type of refrainment. They will refrain from and be distant from mentioning this type of individual's mistakes, and they will consider it. They will consider وَيَعْتَبِرُونَهَا. They will consider this from that which they overlooked. They will consider it to be that which they overlooked and something that they did not harbor against the individual, and they would conceal it and they would not transmit it to others. And that they did not consider from justice and being fair in action the opposite of that. They did not consider the opposite of what was just stated. They did not consider the opposite, meaning the opposite of overlooking and not harboring, the opposite of concealing and not transmitting the person's mistake. The opposite of these things, they didn't consider that to be from justice or being fair in action. Like, for instance, and then he gives some examples, like exaggerating minor issues that the person may have with them, or spreading like in a rumor type sense, that which is a rarity of that individual from mistakes, or magnification of something that is considered to be light in scope or light in degrees, or making plentiful that which is considered to be in small amount. In other words, the A'imma, when they saw another person that was upon the Sunnah, a person who was involved in Dawah from amongst the A'imma, the Imams and scholars and proficient teachers who were involved in spreading the Dawah and spreading Sunnah, if they saw that that person had a mistake, then they would overlook the mistake. They wouldn't harbor it against the individual. And the opposite of that, to magnify that mistake, to spread it amongst the people like gossip, and thus for so on, they looked at that as being from actions that were not considered to be just nor fair. Just nor fair. And we'll come to see what the Sheikh means in a second, because the Sheikh, mashallah, this particular chapter is a beautiful chapter. And just hope that when looking at and reflecting off what is stated, that we become better in implementation of the quote-unquote minhaj and stop being haphazard. But the Sheikh is alluding to people of Sunnah that have with them a legitimate mistake. So now, what about someone who's upon the Sunnah who may not even necessarily be making a mistake? A person assumes or perceives something, but one of the biggest mistakes that the person doesn't do is verify what the situation and true reality of the individual is. And I give some examples in order to make this explicitly clear. You have, in this day and time, a person who's known to be upon the Sunnah, known to be upon Salafiyya, known to follow the Athar, known to follow the principles and the guidelines that are laid out within the text of the Quran and the Sunnah, doesn't oppose the ijma' of the Sahaba in any way whatsoever. You can have a person like this be seen in a picture with somebody else who is deemed to be questionable. And now, because he's seen in a picture with another person that's deemed to be questionable, he now automatically becomes questionable. And the hujjah to substantiate why he is now questionable is the picture. Is the picture. This type of hujjah that people use is not a hujjah at all. It's not a hujjah at all. And in fact, it literally is a non-issue. Why? Because being seen in the picture doesn't establish allegiance to the person who they're in the picture with. It doesn't establish if he defends the person for whatever mistake that he makes. It doesn't establish if he approves of the mistakes that the person is upon. And it doesn't establish, that he agrees with those mistakes. A picture doesn't establish any of that. And if that were the case, then we have major scholars who are seen in pictures with people that were questionable. And if their standard was a standard to be used and applied, then those major scholars would be questionable, and thus forth and so on. But they would never apply it to these scholars, so why is it being applied to teachers here in the West? It doesn't make sense because it's not built and based off any of the guidelines and the principles that are found within the text of the Quran and the Sunnah. So that's one example. Another example. Another example. A person, a student who studies overseas, and this actually happened with me. A person questioned me years ago. A brother studies overseas for X amount of years. And he comes back to the States, and he's given an opportunity to teach at a masjid where the administration is not upon a methodology of the Salaf, and the majority of the people that attend the masjid are not upon the methodology of the Salaf. But he develops a rapport with the community to the point where now they have him teach in the masjid. You have him teach in the masjid. You have some that will now come and say, something's wrong with this guy. He's teaching at this masjid over here. That's not a Salafi masjid. And based off that, some will try to use that as a hujjah to say that student of knowledge, a person should be cautious of that student of knowledge. When in reality, this student of knowledge is doing what he's trained to do. Because again, him being allowed to teach at that masjid doesn't substantiate, that's not a means to substantiate that he is aligned with the admin or people within the masjid that are in khilaf of the sunnah. It doesn't mean that he approves of their opposition to the sunnah. It doesn't mean that he defends their opposition to the sunnah. It doesn't mean that he agrees with their opposition to the sunnah. You cannot establish and substantiate what I just basically said based off the fact that he may be teaching at that masjid. But these are the types of non-issues, the knick-knack, paddywhack type stuff that we see happening from people that say they're Salafi. And they leave you scratching your head and saying, you're Salafi? Really? You? With observations like that? Because we know that it's not impermissible for a person upon the sunnah to go into a masjid and teach the people, especially if they're not putting any conditions on him that prevent him from making his call. Then he needs to go in and teach the people. How else is the sunnah supposed to spread? But then when we hear about certain scholars that go into masajid where the people of innovation are more severe in their innovation than that, when we hear about scholars going into these masajid, these false types of principles and guidelines that they're using vanish. It vanished. They don't apply that then. They just apply it to students of knowledge in the West. As if the Salafiyya in America is different from Salafiyya somewhere else overseas. And this is, without a doubt, a tremendous error, and it's been a means to a lot of the lack of spreading of the Sunnah here in the U.S. Because of stupidity of this nature. So the Shaykh, he continues, he quotes the statement of Imam al-Dhahabi, rahimahullah ta'ala, where Imam al-Dhahabi, just translating for the sake of time, undoubtedly the senior from amongst the Imams of knowledge, if his correctness, for lack of a better translation, sawabahu, if his correctness, him being correct, outnumbers or is more plentiful, and his striving or aspiring to acquire the truth is known, and he becomes expansive in knowledge, in his knowledge, and his intelligence becomes apparent, and he's known for uprightness and piety, and his following of the Sunnah, his following or conformity to the Sunnah, then he is pardoned. He is pardoned for his mistakes, and we do not declare him to be misguided nor throw him away, for lack of better translations. Nor do we forget his good deeds. Of course, we don't follow or emulate him in that which he may have as it pertains to bid'ah or mistake, but we hope that he makes tawbah from that. We hope that he makes tawbah from that. And so, before I continue, you can see, for those that have studied the Qawa'id, Imam al-Dhahabi is basically weighing the masalih and the mafasid, the pros and the cons, and looking at what is more of an advantage to the Muslims in general and that which is a disadvantage to the Muslims in general. And so if you find that the person has this overwhelming good, but he just has this one mistake, but he has this overwhelming good, then you don't dismiss all this good that he has with him for that one mistake. Now again, this is as it pertains to people that actually have a legitimate mistake. But what I'm seeing, and I'm bringing this because what I'm seeing is criticisms being levied at callers to the Sunnah and Salafiyya and the mistake isn't even substantiated. It's just assumed. It's an assumption. And when I ask simple questions, people start getting belligerent because they can't answer the questions properly. I'll give you another case in point. Recently, there's an area in the United States, because there's some areas in the United States where it's considered to be like virgin territory for the dawah to Salafi. We don't find any large number of Salafis in a lot of places here in the U.S. So there's an area where the masajid are either hardcore Sufis or the lighter type Sufis from amongst the Jama'at Tabligh, because as we know, Jama'at Tabligh, as Sheikh Al-Albani stated, Hum Sufiya Asariya, they are the modern day Sufis. But their tasawwuf, the tasawwuf that's with them, isn't as extreme as the full-blown followers of a tariqah that openly claim that and do all the innovative stuff that you won't find in any hadith or in any book of knowledge, except if it's in a section where that type of action is being refuted. So you have an area that's like this, where it's either masajid of Jama'at Tabligh or even more hardcore people on tasawwuf or Ikhwani masajid, with the type of masajid where the general people are professionals, yani immigrant Muslims from Indo-Pacs and Arabs, but they're professionals, so they're not really religious at all. And a lot of the ideas that they have with them, you could tell that they've been affected or influenced by the Ikhwan al-Muslimin and their dawah. So in this area, you only have these types of masajid. Then there's one masjid within an area like this that has an imam in it who is Salafi. He attributes to himself a dawah to Salafiyya, but he never studied overseas. He studied with another beneficial da'i here in the States who did study overseas. That's the most of his studies. But when he left the area where he was taking knowledge from the student of knowledge and went back to his original area, he became the imam of a masjid, and he affirms for himself the dawah to Salafiyya. So a person asked me about this individual, and I tell him, yeah, so-and-so Fulan, he's Salafi. In that area, he's the only Salafi that I know. If people are going to be in that area, they should probably go sit with him, as opposed to going to these other places. So a person then says, well, I heard he promotes Kether wa Kether. So I said, okay, you heard he promotes that. Okay. So I sent the brother who told me this brother's YouTube page that has over 100 videos, and he's talking. The brother that he's making that claim against, it's over 100 videos on his YouTube channel, and every single last video, because it's for the masjid that he's at, every single last video is him talking. So I said, could you direct me to the video where he's promoting what you said he promotes? And he couldn't do it. Now it's, I heard it from another source, and this and that. And then when you start getting down to when you start asking certain questions, you get unacceptable answers. You get totally unacceptable answers. And these types of answers makes it harder for people that really want good for themselves. Why would you prevent a person who is Salafi, who goes into an area like that? Why would you prevent a person from going to that brother's masjid in the midst of all these other type of masajid that I just mentioned for a mistake that you can't even substantiate? At best, you should just tell a person, look, that brother, from what I was told by brothers who know better than me concerning his condition, they say he's Salafi, but he never studied overseas. And so he's on a minbar. So he may make some mistakes because he's not an actual student of knowledge who studied overseas with scholars, but he is somebody that was put in that position, and he is Salafi, and he's going to try to speak closely within the guidelines of Salafiyya. So it's only natural, because he never studied anywhere, that he may make some mistakes. Why don't you just say that? Why wasn't that just said? Why was all this other stuff said? As if to dismiss him, like the mistake that was attributed to him, because it wasn't substantiated, is so large that people got to be cautious. Stay away, don't go over there. Then where are you going to go? Where are the people supposed to go in that area then? Are you weighing the masalih and the mafasid with a statement like that? So they should go to the tablighis? Where should they go? Should they go to the hardcore mutasawwifa? Where should they go? Should they go to the ikhwanis? Where should they go? This is the problem. That people who haven't studied anything speak in a manner about these types of issues with such fervor and intensity, and they're not weighing anything. And their statements that they're making, it's almost as if Salafiyya to some people is how harsh you could be against somebody that makes a mistake or is perceived to have made a mistake. It's as if people think Salafiyya is that. Oh, he said this. No, stay away from him. It's as if people think this is Salafiyya. And this is a problem. So anyway, the Shaykh, he continues. So he says, for example, for instance, and now he's going to give some good examples. As Shaykh Siddiq Hassan Khan al-Hindi, al-ma'ruf inda ulama as-sunnah. He states, Siddiq Hassan Khan al-Hindi, who is well known amongst the scholars of the Sunnah. His level is well known. And then he says, Bel huwa minhum, on the contrary, he is from them, meaning he is from the ulama of the Sunnah. And he states that in his book, Ad-Din al-Khalis, is valued by the ulama. That, along with the fact that he criticizes the dawah to Salafiyya. Siddiq Hassan Khan criticizes the dawah to Salafiyya. في أكثر من كتاب له, in more than one book that was authored by him. However, the scholars, they lowered their gaze towards statements of this nature that Siddiq Hassan Khan made. And they didn't pursue this type of opposition on account of the benefit. لأجل الانتفاع بأصل الشيء, on account of the benefit as pertains to the foundation, the fundamental thing that he was upon. وهو تحقيق التوحيد ودرء الشرك, and it was actualization of tawheed and repelling shirk. And on account of his proceeding as it relates to service to the religion and love of Allah and his messenger. So basically what the Shaykh is explaining here when he gives the example of Siddiq Hassan Khan, that this Imam had this mistake. But his service to the Sunnah was tremendous. So you can't zero in on that mistake that he made due to his service to the Sunnah being tremendous in that regard. You can't just do away with all of this good for this one mistake. So the mistake from him is overlooked and it's not mentioned, because until I had this book, I didn't even know this about Siddiq Hassan Khan. And I believe that the Sheikh is bringing these examples for a reason, and the reason is for us to reflect off the point that he's making. That you can have people that are upon good that may have something with them that was considered to be incorrect. But that issue doesn't negate who they are, if they're upon the dawah and thus forth and so on, and if they should be dismissed or not. But a lot of times we're not weighing these things. He gives another example of Al-Imam Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Sun'ani, rahimahullah. And Imam al-Sun'ani, for those that don't know, he is the author of Subul al-Salam and other books. So he says he had a book that was authored called Purification of the Creed. And he has major efforts in returning the people to the Sunnah and being a means of distancing the people from taqleed, the blameworthy taqleed and ta'assub from bid'ah, and thus forth and so on. And then he states, however, he was mistaken in his attacks against the head of Salafiyya during his time by way of a poem that he wrote. And yani, the person that he's referring to is Sheikh Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab at Tamimi al-Najdi. As the poem that he wrote, it's attributed to him. I guess that he was, whatever poem that he wrote, I guess it's it's attributed to Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, meaning the person who he was talking about. And it was even said that the poem was about his son Ibrahim. His son Ibrahim. And the people of innovation, the heads from the people of innovation, they took advantage of this poem and they spreaded it. They spreaded it. Because it was in favor of them against Sheikh Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab at Tamimi al-Najdi. But he says, but despite this, Al-Imam al-Sun'ani, he aided the dawah in general. He may have had some type of issue with this personality, Sheikh Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. However, the dawah itself, he aided. He aided the dawah. So this is another example that the Sheikh is bringing as it relates to someone that made a mistake, that was overlooked and not transmitted. And in this case, was Shawkani, Al-Imam al-Shawkani, rahimahullah ta'ala. With him is virtue and a high status within the ummah. وَلَكِنْ لَهُ اجْتِهَاد خَاطِئٌ. However, he had with him mistaken ijtihad as it relates to tawassul. And he had with him mistaken ijtihad as relates to the sifat of Allah and as pertains to his tafsir. As it pertains to his tafsir of some of the verses, as some of the verses have within them ta'wil. لكن العلماء لا يذكرون ذلك. However, the ulama, they don't speak about those things. They don't mention those things. وَيَضْرِبُونَ عَنْهُ صَفْحًا. And they pardon him. for those mistakes. They pardon him for those mistakes. So the point that I'm making in reading this is that these were A'imma with legitimate mistakes. But unfortunately, you have Salafi callers, people that are involved in dawah, that may say something or make a move, and it's a perceived mistake. It's not even legitimized. It's not even found to be factual. Why? Because this move that they make, either one, it's a non-issue that people are trying to inflate into an issue, or two, it's a statement or action that has multiple possibilities and people automatically gravitated towards that which was negative instead of verifying the intent behind a statement or action. Between a statement or action. Recently, it just happened with me. Somebody, and I don't want to say what exactly took place, but somebody made an assumption about me. And instead of getting back at me or getting at somebody who could get at me, they automatically assumed that the situation was one way, and it wasn't. It wasn't. And all they had to do, like several of the scholars have advised, if you see a person of the Sunnah, it appears that they have made a mistake or they fell into anything, from what you're hearing from other people, the first thing you do is verify. And there's no better way of verifying something than by calling or contacting the person directly yourself. There's no better way. So I'm going to skip down a little bit to the point where he quotes Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah. And he's quoting him from his book, Madarij al-Salikin. He says, فَلَوْ كَانَ كُلُّ مَنْ أَخْطَأَ أَوْ غَلَطَ تُرِكَ جُمْلَةً. He states, so if every single individual who made a mistake or fell into error was abandoned in a general sense, or considered, or his good was considered to be non-existent, like people act like this, right? Then, his good works, what he's produced, his good works from that which he's produced and thus forth and so on, then they would be invalidated with the people. They would be invalidated. And they would be invalidated and or negated. They would be invalidated and or negated. Now he's saying if we were to take that approach, then that would consequently, if we were to take this haphazard approach, then consequently that will be the result. That all this, the good a person accomplishes will now just be out the window, not even considered, non-existent, wasted. Why? Because the approach from the very beginning was haphazard. And I'm going to skip another example that he gives. He gives an example of Ibn Khuzaymah and the mistake that Ibn Khuzaymah made. But going to the end, because I feel like I've been talking for too long now, he says, فَيَجِبُ أَن يُنظَرْ إِلَى الْمُسْلِمَ الْمُخَالِفِ وَمَدَى مُوَافَقَتُهُ لِأَصْلِ الدِّينِ. He states that, so it is obligatory that the Muslim that falls into opposition, that he is examined, his case is examined, and the extent of his agreement with the Sunnah is likewise, and the extent of his agreement toward the foundations of the deen, that's examined, and the extent of his agreement towards the Sunnah, this is examined, and his supporting Tawheed is examined, and his spreading or circulating beneficial knowledge is examined, and his inviting towards guide or calling towards guidance is examined, and whatever is similar to that, from min al-usul al-amma, from the generalized foundations in which he stands upon and calls to. And the one that is he is advised and as it pertains to what he stands in opposition to. And he is responded to or refuted with mercy and wisdom and clear and authentic evidence. And he is not to be vilified with the type of vilification that causes him to be dropped by the people. Now and again, we're still referring to someone who made a legitimate mistake. And I'm correlating what I'm saying with this because if this is the case with someone who makes a legitimate mistake, then what about someone who it's perceived that he made a mistake, but it's never established? It's really just the people falsely attributing, falsely assuming, and thus forth and so on. Considering themselves to be on a level of ijtihad, entering into affairs where they have no right to enter into affairs where it necessitates that you understand qawaid. Because rulings are being passed, yet they've studied nowhere. But yet they're confidently making statements. Against people's honor. Now, the last time I checked, it was from Salafiyya to know your limits and to not speak above and beyond your limits as it pertains to knowledge. So why do we find people doing that, thinking that they're in defense of the Sunnah? Why do we find this happening? And then the Shaykh, he states, وعلى هذا كان منهج أئمة الدعوة في هذه المسائل كما هو معروف. He states, and on account of that, the methodology of the Imams of Dawah as it pertains to this affair يعني is معروف. فالشريعة جاءت لتحصيل المصالح. As the Sharia, the Islamic legislation, it came to achieve masalih, advantages, benefit, pros. It came to achieve these things and to complete it. And likewise, it came to repel al-mafasid. Yani it came to repel it. Mafasid, yani repel disadvantages and harms and thus forth and so on, or to minimize it. وَكَانَ مِن مِنْهَجِهِمْ. And this was from their methodology. So a lot of times you find when people speak that this basic underlining qasd or intent of the Sharia is not contemplated when people start saying and doing. This basic thing is what I'm about to say about this individual over here going to achieve this maslahah that the Islamic legislation that is underlying the underlying goal of the Islamic legislation encourages with is what I'm about to say about to achieve that. Is what I'm about to tell this brother going to be the means to achieve that maslahah that the Islamic legislation, that is the very underlying goal of the Islamic legislation. It's as if people don't even contemplate this stuff. They don't contemplate dar'ul mafasid awla min jalb al masalih. They don't contemplate that principle. They don't contemplate the principle la darar wa la dirar in every single principle that is considered to be under that or extended from that. It's like they don't contemplate these things. They don't contemplate, for instance, the principle تحملت المفسدة تحملت المفسدة الخاصة لدفع المفسدة العامة. They don't contemplate that. Or other than that, from the Qawaid that clearly points to and illustrates the doing away of a harm, regardless if a harm and the benefit are equal in their magnitude, or the harm is more preponderant than the benefit. And that's why for some it's like they're not contemplating over any of this stuff. It's just there's certain statements of A'imma that's made, and they apply it all across the board in every circumstance and or situation as if they're all the same. And they're all looking for the same result. And it's never achieved. And this is something that's that can't be disputed. All we have to do is look around and see what's going on. All we have to do is open up. If we've been given hearts with sound intellects, eyes with sight that can clearly see, ears that can clearly hear, then we see that some people are making moves, and the very moves that they're making don't achieve the underlying goal of the Islamic legislation. And that's why we are more split than we've ever been. And this is why we're accomplishing little to nothing. We don't even have the ability to combat certain organizations that are spreading filth in the U.S. and other than that. Some of these organizations have $5 million annual budgets. What organizations do we have that can even compete with some of those? And a part of the problem is people's haphazard approach that people take. This is a part of the problem. And so we have to reflect off this. For those that read Arabic, I will highly advise the getting of this book at Salafi by Sheikh Suleiman Abel Khail. If I'm not mistaken, I think I bought this on the website, Sifat Safwa, because that's where I get a lot of my books from nowadays. That's where I get a lot of books from. Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala knows best. This is what I wanted to present because this definitely was on my mind, and hopefully this presentation will be of benefit, inshallah. And with that, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.